A noble, infertile woman was given to an Apache as punishment by her father, but he loved her like no one ever did. The sun was folding itself behind the red cliffs of New Mexico, bleeding gold into a sky that no longer cared to be warm. The wind moved like a memory, slow, aching, brushing dust against the doors of an old wooden cabin that hadn't heard laughter in years. Inside, Clara Mae sat on the porch, wrapped in a grey shawl that had belonged to her mother. She was 32, strong-backed but soft-faced, the kind of woman people described with pity before moving on. Infertile, they whispered. Cursed, they said when they thought she couldn't hear. Her hands were folded in her lap, like something surrendered. For hours, she had been watching the land, as if expecting it to open and swallow her. She hadn't cried when her father loaded her into the wagon that morning, hadn't spoken when he told her she'd brought shame to the family. Only her eyes moved, watching the wind, the road, and the way her sister avoided her gaze. Now, she was here. Not home. Not quite punished. Just handed over like land or livestock to a man none of them had seen in years. An Apache named Elijah, who lived alone at the edge of the dry forest where fire never reached. Her father had called it settling a debt, and so Clara Mae sat, waiting to be claimed. The door creaked behind her. She turned slightly, breath caught in her throat. He stepped out slowly, not like a man coming to meet someone, but like someone listening to ghosts. Elijah was taller than she'd expected, lean, with sun-dark skin and a calm that made the wind seem loud. He didn't wear a shirt, only a long dark coat over his bare chest, and around his neck hung a carved piece of bone, smoothed with time. Their eyes met, just once. She didn't stand. He didn't speak. Instead, he placed a tin cup of water by the wooden beam near her foot, as if she were a stranger who might spook. Then he walked back inside. She stared at the cup like it held fire, and in that moment, the wind stopped, the dusk held its breath, and the world tilted just enough for something sacred to begin. Clara Mae didn't touch the cup of water until the moon had fully risen. It was cold now, the kind of desert chill that crept into the bones and stayed until morning. Still, she didn't go inside. Maybe she didn't know if she was allowed. Maybe she just didn't want to stand and face what came next. When she finally reached for the cup, her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from being forgotten for too long. Inside the cabin, the light of a small fire danced behind the slits in the wood. She could hear the soft clang of metal against wood, and then silence. Not the kind of silence that avoids conversation, but the kind that has already forgiven it. After a long while, the door opened again. Elijah stepped out, holding a wool blanket in his calloused hands. It was worn, frayed at the edges, but clean. He didn't say a word, just approached slowly, knelt down beside her like she was a wounded horse, and draped it gently over her shoulders. She flinched, not from fear, from memory. He noticed. She turned slightly then, eyes tracing the firelight on his face. A scar curved under his left cheekbone, not angry, not fresh. It looked like something that had once been ugly, but had learned how to live quietly. "I can sleep outside," she whispered, unsure why her voice felt like it had dirt in it. "You'll sleep inside," he said. Just that. His voice was deep, grounded like tree roots, not demanding, not kind, just steady, the kind of voice that didn't require proof. Inside, the cabin was warm and plain. A woven rug stretched across the wooden floor. A kettle steamed quietly near the hearth, and near the back, a cot, made fresh, as if he'd expected someone. She noticed then a bundle of toys near the corner, wooden carvings painted in soft strokes, a tiny doll with a broken leg. A child had been here once. She didn't ask. He gestured to the cot. "Yours." She lay down stiffly, pulling the blanket close to her chin, eyes open. He poured warm broth into a tin bowl and placed it on the crate beside her, then retreated to the fire, sitting cross-legged with his back to her, giving space like a prayer. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did he. But something softened between them. A silence not empty, but shared. And when morning came, she noticed that her boots, the ones caked in travel dust, had been cleaned and placed neatly by the door. He hadn't done it for thanks. He hadn't done it to be seen. He had simply done it, as if healing were not a task but a rhythm, and she was already part of it. Days passed like the wind in that place, barely noticed unless you listened for it. Clara Mae did not speak often, and Elijah did not ask. But silence can become soft when it's shared by two people who understand the weight of unspoken things. She began to move about the cabin, sweeping the floor, folding blankets, shelling beans in a wooden bowl by the fire. He never told her to. She simply did. One evening, as the sky turned to ash and the coyotes called from far hills, she found herself watching him carve a strip of cedar. His hands worked slow, methodical. Each curl of wood felt like a sentence he didn't speak. "I was promised to another once," she said suddenly, not sure where the words came from. Elijah didn't look up, but his hand paused. His name was James, a banker's son. Said he loved my hair. Said he'd give me a house with a porch swing. Her voice cracked, but only once. "We tried for years. The doctor said my body was a waste of land. That's what his mother called me." Elijah's carving knife scraped gently. He still said nothing. "My father traded me like a mule after that. Said a barren woman was no better than debt." She looked toward the fire. "I wasn't given to you for peace. I was given to you because no one wanted to see me again." The fire popped. And then, for the first time, Elijah spoke not in command, but in memory. "My wife died giving birth," he said, voice like gravel. "She knew the risk, did it anyway. Said she'd rather try than leave this world untouched." He glanced at the doll in the corner. The baby didn't make it either. Their pain sat between them, not fighting, just resting. The next morning, Clara stepped outside and saw horses on the ridge. 3 men from her old town. One of them was her cousin Daniel, the one who had laughed the loudest at her father's shame. They didn't come down, just watched. She went inside and closed the door. "Someone's here," she said, voice tight. Elijah stood, took his coat and stepped outside. He said nothing to the men, only looked at them. Daniel called out, "We heard she was still alive. Thought she might be miserable enough to come home." Elijah's posture did not change. "She stays where she chooses. She's not yours, Apache." Elijah stared for a long moment, then turned his back and walked inside. Clara sat at the table, her hands shaking around a chipped cup. "He'll tell them I'm here. They'll talk." "Let them talk," Elijah said. "They'll say you stole me." He looked at her, not angry, not soft, just certain. "I don't steal what's already been thrown away." She blinked, not from offense, but from the way truth sometimes stings when it defends you. And for the first time in her life, Clara Mae realized she had not been taken, she had been kept. By the end of the week, the wind changed. It no longer blew east like it always had. It curled around the hills like something circling in thought. Ravens gathered on fence posts, silent and still. The coyotes that once called at night now stood at the edge of the woods, watching the cabin without blinking. Clara Mae noticed it first. She was hanging damp linens on the line when she saw 3 riders on the far trail, not coming closer, just watching. Their horses didn't stamp or neigh. They stood rooted like statues under the bone-white sky. "They're not townsmen," she said, her voice barely rising. Elijah stepped out and looked with his sharp eyes. He said one name, "Ira." A pause. "Who's Ira?" she asked. "Used to be my brother," he said. Nothing more. By sunset there were 5 horses, then 6. Some sat on saddles. Others leaned against pine trees with arms crossed and expressions carved from wind and loss. All Apache, all watching. Clara stayed inside, fingers trembling over the wooden spoon as she stirred beans for supper. "They're here for me," she whispered. "No," Elijah said softly. "They're here for me." That night, the sky held no stars, just a blanket of grey and a half-moon caught behind it, like something trapped. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, casting soft shadows against the walls. Elijah stood by the door, arms crossed, listening. He hadn't spoken in hours. Neither had Clara. But she watched the way his jaw held tension, like an old tree resisting the wind. Then, a knock. Not loud, just 2 soft taps. Elijah opened the door. A tall man stood there, older than him, with white in his hair and a scar across his throat. His eyes didn't scan the room. They landed directly on Clara. "She does not belong here," the man said. "She was sent here," Elijah replied. "That is not the same. She chose to stay. She didn't choose you." A long pause filled the cabin like smoke. Clara stepped forward, her voice barely more than breath. "He never touched me," she said. "Not once. Not without kindness. Not without asking." The older man's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in confusion. He looked at Elijah. "You protect her, but you do not claim her. Why?" Elijah looked at Clara, then back at the man. "Because I was not sent her to possess. I was sent her to witness." Outside, the wind picked up, just enough to shake the trees without snapping them. The men outside didn't move. They didn't cheer. They didn't threaten. They just watched. Watched a woman stand, beside a man she hadn't chosen, but had not run from. Watched an outcast protect another without chains or words. Watched the weight of history bend, not break. Under a new silence, Clara took Elijah's hand then, not out of romance, not yet, out of belonging. And for the first time the world blinked. The visitors didn't return the next day, or the one after. The horses were gone. The hills fell silent again. But something remained, not in the air, but inside Clara Mae. She couldn't explain it, but her chest felt tight, as if her ribs were trying to protect a truth that had waited too long. That night, as Elijah carved quietly in the firelight, she sat on the edge of the cot with her hands folded like a prayer she didn't believe in anymore. "I lied," she said. His knife paused mid-curve. He didn't look up. "I told you James left me because I couldn't have children." She stared at the fire. "But the truth is, I left him." Now Elijah looked at her. "I caught him with someone else, someone younger, fertile. He told me I'd made him desperate." Her voice broke like old wood. "So I ran. I thought I'd die with dignity. But then, the shame followed me anyway. My father said no man would take a used woman who couldn't make life." Tears slipped down her face, not for the first time, but the first time in front of him. "I didn't come here untouched. I came here with nothing left." She waited for judgment, waited for disgust. Instead, Elijah stood slowly, crossed the room, and sat beside her on the wooden bench. He said nothing, just reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of leather. He placed it gently in her hands. She unfolded it. Inside was a carving, small, worn, and beautiful, a piece of driftwood in the shape of a bird, wings outstretched, wind caught in its chest. "I made this for her," he said. "My wife, before she passed." Clara looked at him, confused. "She never got to hold it. I thought no one would." He paused, voice low. "But it's not a gift of love. It's a gift of seeing." She touched the carving, her fingers trembling, and then, without knowing why, she placed it on the shelf beside the child's broken doll. Between two women, one lost, one still breathing, something sacred passed. Elijah didn't hold her. He didn't speak more. He just sat beside her, not as rescuer, not as redeemer, as equal. And in that stillness, Clara Mae understood. Her infertility had never been a lack. It had only been the world's inability to see how many kinds of life a woman could still carry. It had been nearly a month. The linens dried faster now. The earth cracked a little wider with each afternoon heat, and Clara Mae had begun humming, quietly, while shelling beans or sweeping the porch, never when anyone could hear. Elijah had added a second chair beside the fire. Neither mentioned it. Sometimes Clara would catch him watching her, not with want, but with a kind of reverence, as if witnessing someone learning how to breathe again. One evening, as the sun burned low and long shadows stretched across the valley, a dust trail rose in the distance. Not smoke, not storm. A wagon. Clara felt it before she saw it. A tightness in her throat. A memory crawling back up her spine. She stepped onto the porch, squinting into the amber light. Elijah joined her silently. The wagon creaked to a stop at the edge of the cabin clearing, and from it stepped her father. He looked older, leaner, as if shame had been chewing on his bones. His boots touched the ground like he didn't trust it. "Clara," he called, voice rough with age or guilt. "I've come to take you home." She didn't answer. "I was wrong," he said, louder now. "Your sister had a child, a son, but she died last week. Fever. Her husband followed soon after." He looked up at her, not pleading, not demanding, just hollow. "We need you now. The boy needs a woman's care." Still, she said nothing. Elijah stepped forward then, not in defense but in quiet presence. He stood a little behind her, not between. Her father noticed. "You kept her like a secret," he said. "I kept her like a flame," Elijah replied. The wind picked up, not violent, just enough to make the grass bow. Clara finally spoke, voice calm, steady. "You gave me away like a broken pot, and now you return, needing my hands again." Her father looked at the ground. "You didn't come for me. You came for what I could still do for you." He didn't deny it. Then something shifted. From behind the trees, two women appeared. Apache, elders, wrapped in shawls the color of bark and earth. One carried a pouch of herbs. The other had a baby strapped to her chest. They said nothing, just stood in the clearing, eyes on Clara. Clara looked at her father. "I'll come," she said, "but not to your house." He looked confused. "I'll come to see the boy. I'll come with Elijah. And when we leave, it'll be by choice, not because you've claimed me again." He didn't nod, didn't argue. He just turned, climbed into the wagon, and left the way he came. That night, Clara lit a candle beside the carved bird and the child's doll. Elijah watched her from across the room, silent, and outside, in the dry soil, wildflowers began blooming where none had dared before. Seasons turned like slow pages. The boy, Clara's orphaned nephew, came to the cabin wrapped in wool and confusion. He was thin, sunken-eyed, afraid of his own hands. But Clara bathed him, fed him, taught him how to braid twine and whisper to wind. She never called herself his mother, never had to. He called her Clary. And Elijah, he built a second bed, a smaller one, then a shelf, then a cradle, not for infants, but for all the pieces of the past they no longer had to carry. No vows were exchanged, no ceremony, no church, just presence. Every morning, Clara stepped into the field with bare feet, her skirt dusted with pollen and ash. Every night, Elijah placed a fresh log on the fire before she asked. That was enough. The townspeople stopped whispering after a while. Some even sent bread wrapped in cloth. Others came for Elijah's carved toys, gifts for their children now. Not because they forgot who he was, but because they remembered what he'd become. And when Clara's father passed, she didn't attend the burial. Instead, she lit a fire in the small stone circle Elijah had built years ago, placed beside it the folded shawl she wore that first night and the bird carving he had once given her. The boy watched in silence. "Why burn the bird?" he asked. She knelt beside him, hand on his back. "Because it already taught us to fly," she said. Years passed. The doll on the shelf grew old. The boy's shoes got bigger. Elijah's beard turned silver, and Clara's voice, once brittle, now had the warmth of something fully forgiven. Travelers sometimes passed by the cabin, asking for water, direction, or a story. Elijah never spoke much, but Clara would give them a place by the fire, a cup of something warm, and a tale or two. Not of love, not of revenge, but of choosing to stay, of choosing to see someone fully, and still not turn away. One spring morning, long after the world had stopped watching, Clara stood alone in the doorway as the wind carried birdsong through the hills. She closed her eyes, listened, and smiled. She was never claimed, never possessed, only witnessed, and in that witnessing, allowed to become. And just like that, a woman once discarded had changed the world, not with a war, but with the way she stayed.